Welcome to Passions Illustrated. Before starting the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe.
The sound of the fork gently tapping against the empty plate echoed around Table 47 at Maison Azure, one of the most renowned restaurants in Providence, Rhode Island. Marcus Henderson watched the last drops of wine in his glass while the empty chair in front of him seemed to mock his situation. It was the third time that month that Jessica, his wife of 8 years, had gone out for an important dinner with clients. "More wine, Mr. Henderson?" asked a solicitous waiter holding out a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. Marcus straightened his gold-framed glasses and shook his head negatively. "No, thank you. Just the bill, please." From the kitchen through the swinging door, Haley Morrison watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. As executive chef at Maison Azure for 5 years, she had witnessed countless stories unfold between plates of foie gras and soufflés, but something about the quiet dignity of that regular customer intrigued her. "Chef, the sauce for the duck is ready," her sous chef informed her, interrupting her thoughts. Haley turned her attention back to the bustling kitchen, but her mind kept wandering to that lonely man. Over the last few weeks, she had noticed him more and more often, always alone, always with that same look of resigned acceptance that seemed more painful than any display of anger. The next day, Marcus returned to the architectural office where he worked. The project for Providence's new cultural center occupied his desk, but his thoughts were scattered. Jessica's messages flashed across his cell phone. "I'm working late tonight. Don't expect me for dinner." At 7:30 p.m., Marcus found himself once again walking through the doors of Maison Azure. This time, he didn't even bother to book a table for 2. "Your usual table, Mr. Henderson?" asked Amanda, the hostess, with a gentle smile. "Please," he replied, adjusting the navy blue tie that matched his impeccable suit. In the kitchen, Haley made an impulsive decision. "Cooper, take over the salon orders for a moment," she instructed her sous chef as she began working on something special. 20 minutes later, Marcus was surprised when instead of the filet he had ordered, the waiter brought him a dish that wasn't on the menu. "Courtesy of the chef," explained the waiter. "Golden scallops with Sicilian lemon risotto and fresh herbs." The aroma emanating from the dish was sublime. Marcus looked towards the kitchen and through the small window met Haley's gaze, who quickly turned her attention back to her chores. At the first bite, something happened. The delicate flavor of the perfectly golden scallops combined with the creaminess of the al dente risotto provoked a sensation that went beyond taste. It was as if each flavor carried a message of comfort, a non-verbal kindness that said, "You are not alone." In the weeks that followed, a silent routine was established. Marcus always showed up at the same time, and Haley prepared special dishes that weren't on the menu. They never exchanged more than furtive glances and discreet nods of thanks, but a connection was forming through the flavors and aromas she created especially for him. One evening, while savoring a pumpkin ravioli with sage butter, Marcus received another message from Jessica. "I need to talk to you. It's important." He already knew what was coming next. Actually, maybe he'd known for a long time, but the solitary dinners at Maison Azure had become a haven where he could process his emotions in peace, lulled by the comforting flavors coming from Haley's kitchen. "Is dinner to your liking?" The soft voice surprised him. Haley was standing by his table, her cheeks slightly flushed from the heat of the kitchen, her brown hair tied up in a messy bun. "It's perfect," Marcus replied, feeling strangely nervous. "In fact, all the dishes you've prepared over the last few weeks have been extraordinary. Sometimes we need more than just food," she said, her green eyes conveying a deep understanding. "Sometimes you need someone who cares enough to create something special, even if it's just a plate of ravioli." That evening, when Marcus arrived home, he found Jessica sitting in the living room with 2 suitcases packed. The words that followed were predictable estrangement, irreconcilable differences, another man. But surprisingly, Marcus didn't feel the tearing pain he expected. Instead, he felt something different, a sense of possibility like the promising aroma of a dish yet to be tasted. The next day, for the first time in weeks, Marcus didn't show up at the restaurant. Haley tried not to show her concern, but her eyes constantly turned to table 47, now occupied by an elderly couple celebrating their wedding anniversary. When the service was almost over, Amanda entered the kitchen with a small envelope. "Chef, they left this for you at reception." Inside was a simple card with just a few words. "Thank you for feeding not only my stomach, but also my soul. Marcus." Haley smiled, tucking the card into the pocket of her uniform. On the counter in front of her, fresh ingredients were waiting to be transformed into something special, something that could heal broken hearts and perhaps start new stories. The morning after Jessica left, Marcus found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror looking at his reflection with a clarity he hadn't felt for years. The dark circles under his eyes showed a bad night's sleep, but his eyes carried a different glow, perhaps the first sign of liberation. In his office on Waterman Street, projects were piling up on his desk, but his mind constantly wandered to the card he had left at Maison Azure. He wondered if he had been too bold, too personal, too soon. The truth was that those solitary dinners transformed into unique experiences by Chef Haley had become his healing ritual. "Marcus, the meeting with the investors in the library project starts in 5 minutes," announced his assistant Rachel, interrupting his thoughts. During the presentation, Marcus surprised everyone with a renewed energy. His ideas flowed with a creativity that had long been dormant, as if Jessica's absence had unlocked something inside him. The project was approved with unanimous enthusiasm. Meanwhile, at Maison Azure, Haley was rereading Marcus's card for the 10th time, tucked away in her apron pocket. Her hands worked automatically, cutting vegetables with professional precision, while her mind wandered over the meaning of those words. "Chef, we have a situation with the truffle supplier," informed Cooper, his sous chef. "Cancel the order," Haley replied, an idea beginning to form. "Let's do something different today. Call that organic farm in Bristol the one we visited last month." In the evening, Marcus took a deep breath before pushing open the restaurant door. Amanda, the hostess, welcomed him with a warm smile. "Mr. Henderson, how nice to see you again. Chef Haley left specific instructions for your table today." Marcus's heart raced slightly as he was led not to his usual table but to a more private area of the restaurant next to a window overlooking the Providence River. On the table, a small card awaited him. Sometimes the best recipes come from unexpected ingredients. The first course arrived, a roasted pumpkin soup with spices and caramelized pumpkin seeds. The aroma evoked memories of comfort and home, but with a sophisticated touch that surprised him. Each spoonful seemed to carry a silent message of understanding. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Haley coordinated her team with military precision, but her eyes constantly turned to the swinging door, hoping to catch a glimpse of Marcus's reaction to each new dish. "Chef, I've never seen you so focused on a tasting menu before," commented Cooper as she finished the next starter. "Every dish tells a story, Cooper," replied Haley, adjusting the presentation of a ravioli stuffed with goat's cheese and truffled honey. "Sometimes, food is the only language we can use to say what really matters." The dinner went on like a carefully orchestrated symphony of flavors. Each dish seemed to dialogue with the moment. Marcus was experiencing a grilled fish with fresh herbs and lemon, representing lightness and renewal, a lamb with red wine reduction, symbolizing strength and transformation. Between dishes, Marcus found himself observing the movement in the kitchen through the swinging door. In one of those moments, his eyes met Haley's and they held each other's gaze for a few seconds before she turned her attention back to the ovens. When dessert arrived, a delicate, deconstructed apple pie with homemade vanilla ice cream and salted caramel, Marcus realized he was smiling to himself for the first time in a long time. The waiter left another card next to the plate. "The kitchen closes in an hour. Would you like to visit the place where the magic happens?" Marcus felt his heart racing. He finished his dessert, slowly savoring every moment of anticipation. When the last customer left the restaurant, Amanda led him into the kitchen. Haley was cleaning her workstation, her now loose hair framing her face flushed from the heat of the ovens. When she saw him, she smiled a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "So, this is the sanctuary," said Marcus, looking around the spotless industrial kitchen. "Welcome to my world," replied Haley, gesturing to the gleaming pans and professional equipment. "Would you like to learn how to make risotto?" The next hour passed like a dream. Haley taught Marcus the secrets of arborio rice, the importance of hot stock, the exact moment to add the wine. Their hands occasionally touched as they shared utensils, and each accidental contact sent goosebumps across their skins. "You know," said Haley as they tasted the risotto they had prepared together, "when I first saw you dining alone, something told me you needed more than just food." Marcus put down his fork, his eyes meeting hers. "And you were right. Every dish you've prepared over the last few weeks. It was. As if you could read exactly what I was feeling." "Food has always been my form of communication," Haley confessed, playing with a lock of her hair. "When words fail, flavors speak for us." The clock on the wall read almost midnight, when they finally realized how much time had passed. Marcus helped Haley clean up the kitchen, and the silence between them was comfortable, as if they had known each other for years. On the sidewalk in front of the restaurant, under the soft light of the street lamps, they said goodbye with the unspoken promise that this was just the beginning of something new. Marcus walked home feeling light, as if he had left behind not only a failed marriage but also the weight of all the expectations that had imprisoned him for so long. In her apartment, Haley lay on her bed, still wearing her chef's uniform, a smile lingering on her lips as she mentally planned the next day's special menu. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was cooking not just with her hands, but with her heart. A cream envelope rested on Marcus's desk in the architect's office. The invitation to the Rhode Island Association of Architects' annual dinner usually made him anxious. It was an event he had always attended with Jessica. But this time his fingers drummed on the paper while a discreet smile formed on his lips. Picking up the phone, he dialed the number for Maison Azure. "Good afternoon. I'd like to speak to Chef Haley Morrison, please." A few minutes later, a familiar voice warmed her ears. "Marcus, did something happen to yesterday's risotto?" "Actually," he laughed, "I was wondering if you'd agree to be my date for an event next Friday. It's a formal dinner for the Architects Association, and—" "Are you inviting me to criticize the food at another restaurant?" Haley teased, her musical laughter echoing down the line. "Consider professional market research," Marcus replied, feeling inexplicably lightheaded. In the kitchen of Maison Azure, Haley hung up the phone with her heart racing. Cooper watched her with a raised eyebrow as she finished a hollandaise. Sauce. "So, Chef, are you finally going to trade in your pans for a gala dress?" "Get back to work, Cooper," she replied, but she couldn't hide the smile that lit up her face. The days leading up to the event passed in a blur of activity. At the restaurant, Haley channeled her extra energy into ever more daring creations. A local food critic even wrote that Maison Azure was outdoing itself with surprisingly emotional and personal combinations. On the night of the event, Marcus was adjusting his bow tie in front of the mirror when the doorbell rang. As he opened the door, he momentarily lost his breath. Haley looked stunning in an emerald green dress that highlighted her eyes, her normally tied-up hair now falling in soft waves over her shoulders. "Are you?" Marcus began, but the words seemed inadequate. "Different without the chef's uniform, aren't you?" Haley added, a faint blush tinging her cheeks. The lobby of the Hotel Providence was elegantly decorated for the event. As they entered, Marcus noticed the curious glances of his colleagues. Jessica had always been a strong presence at these events, known for her sharp opinions and aggressive networking. Haley, on the other hand, emanated a quiet elegance that drew people in naturally. During dinner, she couldn't help technically analyzing. Each dish served whispering observations that made Marcus smile. "The sauce is slightly separated," she commented discreetly about the starter, "and I'd bet the duck was prepared too far in advance." "You're ruining my taste buds forever," Marcus joked, leaning closer. After that, how am I going to be able to dine anywhere other than Maison Azure? Maybe that's exactly my marketing strategy, she replied with a mischievous smile. The evening flowed, naturally punctuated by interesting conversations and genuine laughter. During the dance, when the orchestra started playing The Way You Look Tonight, Marcus led Haley out onto the dance floor. The moment their hands met sent an electric current through them both. "Did you know that every song has its own flavor?" Haley commented as they danced. "This one, for example, reminds me of a chocolate soufflé, classic romantic, timeless." Marcus spun her around gently, taking the opportunity to bring her closer. "And what does this moment taste like?" Before Haley could answer, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Marcus! What a surprise to find you here." Jessica was standing next to them, accompanied by a tall man in an Italian suit. His smile was polite, but his eyes followed Haley with calculated interest. "Jessica," Marcus replied with a calmness that surprised even himself. "This is Haley Morrison, executive chef at Maison Azure." "Oh, so you're the famous chef," Jessica exclaimed with false animation. "Marcus always loved that restaurant. I imagine you got close after, well, you know." Haley felt Marcus tense slightly next to her, but her voice remained firm. "Actually, Jessica, Haley taught me that sometimes you have to lose your sense of taste to really start savoring life." The double meaning of the sentence didn't go unnoticed. Jessica mumbled an apology and walked away, dragging her companion with her. When they were gone, Haley gently squeezed Marcus's hand. "Are you okay?" "Surprisingly, yes," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Do you know what's strangest? Seeing you didn't move me as much as I expected. It's as if you'd tasted something better and couldn't settle for less." Haley added, a mischievous glint in her eye. Marcus laughed, pulling her back into the dance. "We always come back to food with you, don't we?" "It's my language," she shrugged, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But I'm willing to learn new dialects." As the evening drew to a close, they walked slowly through historic downtown Providence, the crisp autumn air carrying promise on the wind. They stopped in front of the Maison Azure, its lights already dimmed for the night. "Do you want to see my other sanctuary?" Haley asked, pulling a set of keys out of her purse. In the dark of the silent kitchen, illuminated only by the moonlight, coming through the windows, they shared a vanilla ice cream that Haley had prepared earlier. The moment was intimate, special, like a delicious secret that only the two of them knew. "You know," Marcus said, watching her wipe a smudge of ice cream from the corner of her mouth, "I think I finally understand why I came to this restaurant so often after Jessica started moving away." "Why?" "Because, subconsciously, I knew I'd find something real here, something that didn't need excuses or elaborate explanations. Something that, like your food, simply made sense." Haley moved closer, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "And what did you find?" Marcus's answer came in the form of a soft kiss, vanilla flavor, and endless possibilities. In the dark kitchen of Maison Azure, where it had all begun, they discovered that sometimes the best flavor is the one that comes unexpectedly when you least expect it, but just when you need it most. Fall was painting Providence in golden hues when Marcus received the email that would change everything. A prestigious architectural firm in Boston was interested in his innovative design for the Cultural Center, the same one he had presented with renewed creativity after Jessica's departure. The opportunity was tempting, but it meant significant changes in her life, including a possible move to Massachusetts. At Maison Azure, Haley was facing her own challenges. A renowned gastronomic magazine had published a glowing review of the restaurant, especially highlighting its unique creations of recent months. The result was immediate bookings skyrocketed, and along with them, expectations. "Chef, we have a 3-week waiting list," Amanda said, looking at the reservation book. And the Food Network called again about that show proposal. Haley massaged her temples, feeling the weight of the decisions she had to make. The restaurant's growing success was gratifying, but also daunting. Each new accolade brought with it the pressure to excel. That evening after service, Marcus was waiting for her in the empty kitchen as had become customary in recent weeks. The aroma of freshly prepared risotto hung in the air. He had insisted on cooking for her this time. "Well?" he asked eagerly, watching her taste his creation. Haley closed her eyes, savoring. "The rice is a little too al dente, but the taste is surprisingly good. You've been a dedicated student." Marcus smiled, but there was a tension in his shoulders that didn't go unnoticed. "I got a job offer today, in Boston." Haley's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Boston? It's an important project, bigger than anything I've ever done. But," he hesitated, his eyes meeting hers, "I don't want to make any decisions without considering us." The word us hung between them, loaded with meaning. Over the last few weeks, their relationship had blossomed naturally like a well-balanced recipe. After-hours dinners turned into Sunday strolls through Roger Williams Park. Conversations about cooking techniques evolved into deep confidences about dreams and fears. "I have news too," Haley said, playing with the risotto on her plate. "The Food Network wants me to host a show. It would be taped here in Providence, but it would require a lot of my time." Marcus approached, taking her hands in his. "It looks like we're both at a turning point." "Life has those things," she smiled softly, "like when a lonely customer starts frequenting your restaurant and ends up changing everything. Or when a talented chef decides he needs more than just food," Marcus added, leaning in to kiss her. The next few days were intense for both of them. Marcus traveled to Boston to see the office and discuss the details of the project. Haley immersed herself in meetings with television producers, trying to find a balance between her responsibilities at the restaurant and the new opportunities. On one particularly hectic afternoon, Cooper found Haley in his office, surrounded by papers and menu samples. "Chef, are you okay? You seem distracted," Haley sighed, leaning back in her chair. "When you dream about something for so long, Cooper, and suddenly everything starts happening at once, it's scary." "Are you talking about the TV show or The Architect?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Both. It's like having all the perfect ingredients in your hands but being afraid of ruining the recipe." The following Friday, Marcus returned from Boston late at night. Instead of going home, he drove straight to Maison Azure. The restaurant was closing, the last customers saying goodbye when he walked in. Haley found him in the kitchen, his special place where it had all begun. She was still wearing her chef's uniform, her hair tied up in its characteristic bun, and Marcus thought he had never found her so beautiful. "How was Boston?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "I accepted the project," he replied, watching her reaction. "But I negotiated to manage most of the work from here in Providence with weekly visits to Boston." The relief on Haley's face was visible. "Marcus, I'm not done," he continued, stepping closer. "Seeing that office in Boston, that incredible opportunity made me realize something important. All my projects, all my designs, are about creating spaces where people can feel at home. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I had found my own place here in this kitchen with you." Haley felt tears forming in her eyes. "I've decided to do the show," she revealed, "but on one condition, that it's about more than just recipes. I want to show how food can heal, connect people, tell stories." "Like you did with me?" "Exactly, and you know what I think. I need a space specialist to help me redesign the studio kitchen." She smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "What a coincidence," Marcus murmured against her lips. "I know an architect who's looking for local projects." That evening, as the fine rain began to fall on Providence, Marcus and Haley stood in the kitchen of Maison Azure, planning not just menus and projects, but a future together. Like a well-crafted dish, their lives were blending together in a perfect combination of flavors, textures, and possibilities. "Do you know what that reminds me of?" Haley asked, nestled in Marcus's arms. "What?" "That first dish I prepared for you. The scallops with Sicilian lemon risotto. Sometimes it takes courage to change a recipe to risk something new." Marcus smiled, understanding perfectly. Sometimes the best love stories start with a lonely dinner and end with a promise never to eat alone again. Haley's debut show on the Food Network had been a resounding success. Flavors of the Soul captured the audience's attention not only with its extraordinary recipes but with the heartwarming stories behind each dish. However, it was an unexpected phone call that turned his world upside down. Chef Morrison. "This is Richard Thompson, editor-in-chief of Culinary Masters magazine. We're doing a special feature on your career and, well, we've discovered something interesting about your father." The name that Richard then mentioned made Haley sit up abruptly in her chair. James Laurent, one of the most renowned chefs on the East Coast who died 5 years ago. The man who, according to the editor, was her biological father. Marcus found Haley still in her office at Maison Azur hours after the phone call. She was surrounded by old culinary magazines all open to articles about James Laurent and his legendary restaurant in Newport. "He worked with my mother in the early 90s, Haley explained, her voice shaking. "Before I was born, before he became famous. She never told me." Marcus knelt down beside her, noticing how her hands trembled as she turned the pages. "Do you want to talk to your mother about it?" "She's been in Arizona for years, living her new life with her new husband," Haley replied bitterly. "But what's ironic, all this time I've admired his work, studied his techniques. I had all his cookbooks, and never—" "Hey," Marcus interrupted her, gently taking her hands. "Maybe that's why you've always had this special connection with cooking. It's in your DNA." A faint smile appeared on Haley's lips. "Do you know what's strangest? His restaurant in Newport has been abandoned since his death. No one has been able to buy it because of problems with the estate." Marcus's eyes lit up with an idea. "I think we need to take a trip to Newport." The next day, they drove along the Rhode Island coast until they reached the former Le Jardin, the restaurant that had been James Laurent's kingdom for 2 decades. The Victorian building, although abandoned, retained its stately elegance. As they walked through the dusty interior, Haley felt an inexplicable connection with the place. The large windows overlooking the ocean, the layout of the professional kitchen, even the layout of the main hall, everything seemed strangely familiar. "It's like I've been here before," she murmured, running her fingers over the old industrial stove. Marcus, who was examining the structure with an architect's eye, stopped beside her. "This place has incredible potential. With the right renovations." "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" "A new beginning," he smiled. "A place that combines your culinary vision with my architecture." Haley closed her eyes, imagining the possibilities. Le Jardin reborn, not as a shadow of the past, but as something entirely new. A place where stories could be told through food, where her biological father's legacy could be honored in a way that was all her own. "But what about Maison Azur?" she asked, doubt creeping into her voice. "Cooper is more than ready to take over as executive chef," Marcus replied. "You know that. Besides, with the TV show and this new project, maybe it's time to expand his horizons." That evening, sitting in a small seaside restaurant in Newport, Haley finally plucked up the courage to call her mother. The conversation was long and emotional, full of long-held revelations and restrained tears. "He wanted to be a part of your life," her mother confessed. "But I was young and proud, and when he started to become successful, I thought it would be better that way." After the call, Marcus held Haley while she processed everything. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that were reminiscent of the delicate sauces she created in her kitchen. "You know what's funny?" she finally said. "I always wondered why I felt so at home, in a professional kitchen. Why each new dish felt like a way of telling a story I didn't know I needed to tell. Some things are beyond comprehension. Marcus replied, kissing her forehead, like a lonely architect finding healing through specially prepared dishes. The following week, between recording the show and meeting with lawyers about Lee, Jardine Haley discovered a box of James Laurent's personal belongings that had been stored in the restaurant. Among old papers and photographs, she found a handwritten recipe book. On the last page, a note made her freeze. "For my daughter Haley, who may one day find this notebook and understand that every recipe here was created with the moment we could cook together in mind." Marcus found her crying in the kitchen of the Maison Azure that night, the notebook open on the counter and a pot bubbling on the stove. "It's the recipe for the sauce that made you famous," she explained, wiping away her tears. "And you know what, I had already recreated something very similar a few years ago by instinct, as if I somehow knew." "Some flavors," Marcus said softly, "are passed down through generations even when the stories aren't." The aroma that filled the kitchen was complex and comforting, like a long-awaited hug. As they tasted the sauce together, Haley felt that she was finally beginning to understand not only her history, but also her future. "I think I know exactly what to do with Le Jardin," she said, a new sparkle in her eyes. "It will be a place where people can discover their own stories through food, just as I discovered mine." Marcus smiled, recognizing that determined look he had learned to love. "And I'll be here to help build every inch of that dream." The news about Le Jardin quickly went viral in Rhode Island's gastronomic community. The unknown daughter of the legendary James Laurent was about to reopen the iconic restaurant now with a completely renewed vision. The pressure on Haley grew by the day, but she found strength in Marcus's constant presence and her father's recipe booklet. "Look at this," she showed Marcus during a break in the renovations. "Each recipe has a story written in the margin. This mushroom sauce, he created it when he found out my mother was pregnant." Marcus put his arm around her, looking at the yellowed scribbles. The renovation of Le Jardin was progressing rapidly under his supervision. The large Victorian windows had been restored, allowing natural light to flood in. The kitchen was being completely modernized, but retaining vintage elements that told the story of the place. Chef Morrison Cooper appeared in the doorway, holding out his phone. "The Food Network called. They want to film the opening of Le Jardin for the season finale of your show." Haley felt her stomach turn. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant that millions of people would witness her attempt to honor the legacy of a father she never knew. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked when they were alone. "No," she admitted, playing with the ring he had given her the week before, a surprise during an intimate dinner at their new home in Newport. "But I guess that's how it should be. My father probably wasn't ready when he first opened this place, either." The weeks leading up to the opening were intense. Between recording the show, overseeing the renovations, and developing the menu, Haley barely had time to breathe. But every spare moment was dedicated to studying James's recipe booklet. One afternoon, while testing one of the old recipes in the experimental kitchen, she received an unexpected visitor. An elegant lady in her 70s was standing in the doorway, her watery eyes fixed on Haley. "You look just like him," the woman said softly. "I'm Margaret. I was your father's sous chef for 15 years. The next few hours were spent listening to stories about James Laurent that no magazine article had ever told. About how he insisted on greeting every customer personally, how he spent hours perfecting a single recipe, how he kept a baby photo of Haley hidden in his drawer. "He never gave up on you," Margaret revealed, holding Haley's hand. "Even when your mother made it clear that she didn't want you around, he found ways to follow your life from afar. He knew when you went to culinary school, when you got your first job as a chef." The revelation hit Haley like a wave. All those years when she thought she was alone on her culinary journey, there was a pair of proud eyes watching her from afar. Marcus found her later that evening sitting on the pier next to the restaurant, watching the lights of Newport reflected in the water. "Margaret told me about the visit," he said, taking a seat next to her. "How are you?" "It's weird," Haley replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I always thought I was following my own path, but somehow I was following in his footsteps too." It's like every decision I made in the kitchen was guided by a memory I didn't even know I had. Opening day arrived with an electric energy in the air. Food Network cameras captured every moment as the team made the final preparations. The menu was a perfect fusion of James's classic recipes and Haley's contemporary creations. "Nervous?" Marcus asked, adjusting his tie in the makeshift office. "Terrified," she admitted, smoothing out her chef's uniform. "But you know what? For the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I should be." The restaurant quickly filled up with critics, celebrities from the gastronomic world, and old customers from the original Le Jardin. Margaret was there, as was Cooper and the entire Maison Azur team. Even Haley's mother had traveled from Arizona to be present. When it was time to present the first course, Haley took a deep breath and walked out into the hall. The cameras followed her as she explained each element of the menu, each story behind the recipes. "This place," she began, her voice steady despite her emotion, "is not just a restaurant. It's a love letter to a father I never met, but who has always been present in every dish I've created. It's a celebration of how food can connect us across time and space, how it can tell stories that words can't express." Marcus watched proudly as she conducted the evening with a natural grace that was so reminiscent of the stories he had heard about James. Every dish that came out of the kitchen was met with expressions of delight and, in some cases, tears of recognition from former customers. At the end of the night, when the last customer had left and the cameras had been turned off, Haley found a moment of stillness in the kitchen. Her fingers gently traced the stove where her father had created so many memories, now the place where she would begin to create her own. Exactly 1 year after Le Jardin opened, Haley was standing in the same kitchen where her father had created so many culinary masterpieces. The restaurant had become a national phenomenon, with reservations made months in advance and food critics heaping praise not only on the food, but also on the unique atmosphere that blended history and innovation. "Chef, your mother has just arrived," announced Amanda, now Le Jardin's manager. "She's waiting in your office." Catherine Morrison had moved back to Rhode Island 3 months earlier after Haley invited her to help run the restaurant. The reconciliation between mother and daughter was a gradual process built on honest conversations and shared recipes. "Honey." Catherine hugged her daughter. "The flowers for the event have arrived, and Marcus called to confirm that he'll be here in an hour." Haley smiled, thinking about how her life had changed. Le Jardin wasn't just a restaurant. It had become a center for stories and connections. Every Thursday, it offered free cooking classes for low-income young people inspired by a story Margaret told about how James used to mentor aspiring chefs who couldn't afford formal education. The show on the Food Network had evolved into a documentary series about the stories of families and their traditional recipes. Each episode ended at Le Jardin, where Haley would recreate these recipes with her own special touch. Chef Morrison. Cooper appeared in the doorway. He still visited her regularly, even though he had turned Maison Azur into his own success. "The preparations for tonight are almost ready, but there's something you need to see in the kitchen." In the main kitchen, Haley found Margaret surrounded by dozens of chefs, all dressed in their white uniforms. They were former apprentices of James Laurent, people who had worked with him over the years. "Surprise." Margaret smiled, tears in her eyes. "They've all come to celebrate not only Le Jardin's birthday, but also to give you this." She handed Haley an old box. Inside was a collection of letters James had written over the years, letters he never sent, each one detailing his hopes, his dreams, and his love for the daughter he never got to meet. "He asked me to give these to you when he thought you were ready," Margaret explained. "And after seeing what you've done with this place, how you've honored not only his memory, but also created something all your own, I know this is the time." Haley sat down on one of the kitchen stools, her hands shaking as she opened the first letter. The handwriting was similar to the recipe book, but more personal, more vulnerable. "My dear Haley," the letter began. "Today you turned 5. I saw you from afar in the park feeding the ducks. Your little hands threw pieces of bread so carefully, and all I could think about was how I'd love to teach you how to make your own bread. Marcus found her like this an hour later, surrounded by open letters and chefs sharing stories about his father. He approached her silently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Better than fine," she replied, wiping away tears. "All these people, each one has a different story about him. It's like I'm finally getting to know my father through their eyes." The evening celebrating Le Jardin's first anniversary was more than just a party. It was a celebration of heritage, of family found and chosen, of loves lost and found. Guests enjoyed a special menu that told Haley and James's story through food, each dish a fusion of his classic recipes and her modern interpretations. In the middle of the celebration, Marcus asked for everyone's attention. Standing next to Haley, he shared his plans to expand Le Jardin not just as a restaurant but as a culinary school that would offer scholarships to young talent. James Laurent believed that food has the power to transform lives, Marcus said, and no one proved that better than his daughter, who not only transformed this place but transformed all of us in the process. After the guests had left, Haley and Marcus walked along Newport Beach, the sound of the waves mixing with the distant music still playing in the restaurant. "You know," Haley said, pausing to look up at the stars, "for years I felt incomplete, like I was looking for something I couldn't name. I found it in the kitchen then, in you, and now. Now I have all these letters, all these stories." "And what have you discovered?" Marcus asked, hugging her from behind. "That sometimes we need to lose something to find our way back home. That every dish I created, every flavor I tasted was a way of connecting with it, even if I didn't know it." Back at Le Jardin, Haley prepared one last dish, a simple recipe she had found on the first page of her father's notebook. It was a dish he had created the day he found out he was going to be a father. As she and Marcus shared that late meal in the silent kitchen, Haley felt a deep peace. The walls of Le Jardin now held not only James Laurent's memories, but also the new stories that were being created there, stories of love, of loss, of redemption, and above all, of finding one's place in the world. To the future. Marcus raised his glass. "For the flavors that brought us here," Haley added, her engagement ring sparkling under the kitchen lights. And there, in the place where it all began, and began again, they knew they were writing just the first chapter of their own story, a story seasoned with love, longing forgiveness, and the promise of many shared meals in the years to come.